Good evening, listeners. Thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of Legal Talk with Patricia Bryan. And of course, this is Patricia Bryan here speaking with you. I am very excited to say we have two lawyers on the show today. We will be discussing issues immigration related and specifically work permits and that arena. The attorneys in studio with me today is Mr. Alastair David and Ms. Hilary Brooks of HSM Chambers. I got that correct. And before I move on to our guest, I wanted to take this opportunity to again invite listeners and viewers to find a nonprofit organization of your choice here in the Cayman Islands and either donate your valuable time or your hard-earned funds somewhere to a nonprofit organization of your choice. They are desperately in need, and this would be a great help. Also, I want to thank the sponsors of the show for sponsoring another episode. Today, Mr. Alastair, if I may call you Alastair, and if I may call you Hilary.
That's absolutely fine.
Thank you very much. Today, Alastair and Hilary are going to start telling us about themselves and their firm that they are, well, I guess one or the other can speak about their firm, HSM. I know HSM is the senior partners, Mr. Hugh Moses, and I am also aware that Alastair David is a senior associate in the legal field and is a well-known attorney for his services in immigration and employment law. He's also a reputable attorney in the area of my favorite area of law, human rights and litigation. Hilary herself is also a senior associate in law, and she is also a highly experienced attorney with a proven track record in labor and employment law. She also has experience and supports private client matters. Now, listeners, we know in the climate of today's atmosphere in the Cayman Islands, immigration law and all that entails, especially work permits, Cayman status and permanent resident, that has a high demand for information. People are, very unnerved by the current situation surrounding these issues, and I am so pleased to have had Alastair and Hilary agree to come on the show with us to talk about these issues today. And moving forward, I welcome Alastair to the microphone so he can start sharing a little bit about the firm that they're representing, and then himself personally and then professionally.
Well, I've been with HSM since 2016. Before coming to the Cayman Islands, I was a barrister in the United Kingdom, specialising in employment and immigration law. Since I've been here, that's pretty much what I do, with an interest in human rights law, but that comes into predominantly the immigration side of the work. So the PR appeals, other matters along those lines, and revocations of immigration permissions, that's I get involved with. On a outside of work basis, and I'm glad that you mentioned volunteering with charities. I'm a volunteer with the Cayman Heart Fund, and I can only echo your calling to your listeners to give generously to all charities in the Cayman Islands, but if I could give a particular shout out to the Cayman Heart Fund.
Cayman Heart Fund?
Yeah.
I've never heard of that organization, but there we have it, listeners. Cayman Heart Fund is one organization that is a nonprofit business, nonprofit organization that could definitely use volunteering of your time and especially your funds to help the organization continue to function and operate and provide the services that they do. Sorry, Alastair.
That's okay. So HSM, we cover pretty much all areas of law apart from crime at the moment. We do a bit of regulatory criminal work, which, so for instance, you're prosecuted for making a mistake in regards to an employment matter or a immigration matter, we will cover that, but we wouldn't do people getting fights. You get into a fight or anything along cover nearly every area of law, including if you're buying a house, you're selling a house, wills, immigration, employment. We're your one-stop shop for.
Okay, I've seen that on the website, yes.
For most things
Okay.
legally related to the Cayman Islands, and we also have a commercial section, a corporate section, and we do, or part of the HSM organisation does intellectual property work as well.
Okay, okay. And tell us a bit about HSM, the actual, oh, well, you just did that, I'm sorry. Hilary, if you could tell us a bit about yourself,
Sure.
personally and then professionally.
Yeah, like Alastair, I've also been at HSM since 2016. He did get there a few months before me though. Unlike Alastair, I didn't move to HSM from off Island. I was actually born in the Cayman Islands and qualified here.
Okay,
And I've worked in Court of the Bar since 2012.
okay, so you attended school where again?
I went to law school in the Cayman Islands.
Okay.
Your very first guest was a representative from there.
Right,
She
yes.
wasn't there when I was there, but.
Okay, okay. That is very good to know, that we've had our first official Caymanian lawyer and first official Caymanian lawyer graduate from the Cayman Islands, the Truman Bodden Law School here in studio.
Yeah, that actually hadn't changed its name to Truman Bodden Law School when I was there. It was still the
Oh,
Cayman Islands Law
Cayman
School.
Islands Law
It's
School,
Same
still,
place.
yes. You can continue.
Outside of work, charity that I volunteer my time for, and I'm very close to my heart, because unfortunately I've had to use their services personally as well as the Jasmine hospice care.
Oh, yes, I've had some experience with some of the workshops with Jasmine.
Yeah.
Okay.
They do a great job, and you know, they'd probably kill me if I didn't say that it's also completely free
Yes.
if you need to use their services.
Yes, and what are their services about again? Because not only are we trying to promote the nonprofit, since we're on that, but also, you know, nonprofit organizations formation is under, you know, a lawful thing. So we like to, maybe that's another thing you guys can come on and talk about, forming nonprofit organizations, because that also falls under immigration. Well, not under immigration, but
Employment is in the labor.
trade and business, yes.
Yeah.
So, sorry to,
No, no.
cut you, okay. So, I'm not sure if you have your two talking points to speak on individually, but I'd like to, give you a chance to start. Hilary, if you wanted to start first, or?
I think it's, if the main talking point is going to be around work permits, Alastair should probably start
Okay.
first, because he's the guru. I'm here
Okay.
in assistance with ancillary issues once you're employed in work permits that need to be.
Okay. Now, I hope you forgive me, I need to remember to stare at this piece of paper and stay on topic, because when it comes to immigration, it's easy to sway over, but we'll go right along with you, Alastair, and let you lead.
So really here to talk about generally the problems that employers and employees can find themselves in regards to work permits.
Right.
We've seen a lot of articles in the newspaper recently, both in the Compass and CNS, about employers getting into trouble by doing breaches of the labour law, the immigration law.
Right,
And as a result of that, being some hefty fines being given out. And this, what we were hoping to do today was to come and explain to your listeners how they can avoid the problems that some employers can get into in regards to these matters, in particular in relation to various different things. Because the Cayman Islands, the primary role of an employer is you should always have a Caymanian if they can do that job first.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
when that's completely correct. So when you're looking for a employee to fill a position, you start off by having to post a job, or if you're asking for a full work permit, you certainly would have had to have advertised on the Jobs Cayman website. Now, one of the things that we're finding, the problems that employers come up with, is that they don't put an adequate description of the role.
Yes, yes.
Now, it's vital that for a number of reasons, it's vital why you should do a adequate description of the role. A, because if a Caymanian's interested in the role, they can look, oh, that's a role that I'm interested
Yes,
for. If there's
absolutely, yes.
hardly any information in it, someone might overlook that role. They might think, well, I don't know what that is, I'm therefore not interested, therefore not apply.
Right, so the first thing you would advise employers is to ensure that they put a thorough description of the job in their adverts.
Yes, and it also protects them as well.
Right, yes.
Because the job descriptions and the job titles, there is no definition or no legal definition in lots of the job titles.
Yes, yeah.
So what the employer might think a person can do might not be what immigration, the board, or a investigator might think.
Okay,
the
because
person
they're
can
looking
do.
at things differently.
Because I say there is no formal guidance in regards to what that role entails.
Okay,
So therefore, all the immigration have to go on is that initial description. And
Description.
when you apply for the permit, whether it's a temporary work permit or the full work permit, okay, they will go on the cover letter. So if it's just a very, very plain description, and there's something specific that you want that person to do, immigration won't know anything about it.
yes,
And then you might find yourself in a problem where a year down the line, immigration have a report that person's working outside the terms and conditions of their work permit,
yes.
and they'll
So
start
if-
investigating.
Sorry, if I may interject for a minute. We've seen, especially since COVID and people weren't, I guess, jobs were, people were laid off their jobs and so forth. We've seen an increase, and I'm sure you've probably seen this, we've seen an increase in business license applicants, especially Caymanians and small business owners. And rightly, as you've said, many of these businesses are finding themselves in backed up into a corner because they're not, performing in such a way that would be in compliance with the immigration law, you would say.
Some businesses certainly do find themselves just by pure mistakes,
Right,
getting
right.
into trouble. Whereas if they did things in a slightly different way, they would
Okay.
avoid that issue.
Okay.
It was happening before COVID though as well,
Yes.
but I think recently there has been, the Department of Work have been investigating matters,
More frequently, more.
well, it appears to be more frequently. I don't know if it's just that I'm particularly busy at the moment, or
Right.
they are more frequent, but they are investigating matters. People report things to them, they have a duty
Yes.
to investigate.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time there is issues out there. Some of the time there isn't issues, and they'll
Right.
accept that when
Yeah.
they think they'll ask questions to an employer, they'll listen to what the employer has to say, and they'll make a decision. But say the starting point should always be that if you make the advertisement and the jobs Cayman posting as clear as possible,
Right.
it's very difficult for someone to come back a year down the line and say, oh, well, we didn't understand that's what the person was going to be
Absolutely.
doing. If you said, well, hang on a second, I told you what I was going to be doing.
Absolutely.
But say the predominant reason why you're doing this is it's not necessarily to cover your back in regards to you're worried about being prosecuted. It's because the Caymanians out there should have the opportunity to do that role, and they should understand what it is exactly they're going to be asked for.
Right, yeah.
And therefore, you should be looking predominantly for that individual to go, oh, back in the day when you had people going through the Cayman Compass, they always used to look at the jobs. I used to do it, and I'm not a Caymanian.
Yeah.
On Friday afternoon, I'd be buying the Compass, and I'd be
Compass
going
and
through
look to
all those
see.
job titles, looking at them. And some of the time, you would look at those adverts, and you wouldn't have a clue about what the role
What
was.
the role was. I
And
agree.
if you're encouraging Caymanians to do that job, that's where the Caymanian will get the information on the spouse of a Caymanian, a PR holder, and things along those lines. Oh yeah, I understand what that is. Oh, that sounds interesting. I'm interested
And
in
also
doing
to
that.
prevent unnecessary applications for people who may not be qualified for the position either. you
Well,
know?
exactly, yeah. I guess there's certainly that respect, that the business might not want to be over-inundated
Right,
with
with
applications which aren't useful or anything along those lines. But I say, there's certainly that idea that you're looking for the Caymanian, the best Caymanian to do the job, and if you can't find the Caymanian to do it, then you do have that fallback position, is, there's a work permit holder or an expatriate who can do that role. And therefore, it's, the work permit board or the business staff employment board know exactly what it is that this person's going to be doing, and there can be no dispute.
Right.
And that clears up so many issues, and it just means that you have to spend a little bit more time on the work permit application or on the jobs Cayman posting.
So we hear that, listeners. Alastair is telling business owners, and I've found, especially with the smaller business owners, that this is something they're not doing as often also, which is, you know, working against them. So, Alastair, you just might wanna reiterate those 2 points, because for me, they're very important points, because it hinders the process of their work permit applications. It most likely hinders their approvals also.
Well,
You know?
certainly going forward,
Yeah.
there's a suggestion that certain businesses are going to have their applications scrutinised far more if they are on a blacklist or a grey list.
Okay.
And that's going to make it far more difficult to get work permits. You know, if you do things properly the first time, the work have regard to that, they accept that you've done it properly, and then you have a history of compliance.
Right.
If you're starting up a business in the Cayman Islands, a lot of the time, you know, you're trying to get all your ducks in order, and the work permit sometimes might not necessarily think about it as carefully as you need to. For instance, you could have a situation where you have somebody who's going to be in a fairly menial role going forward, but for the first couple of months, they might be doing some administration roles, but that's only because the business is getting up and started. Well, if you put that down in writing and saying, we're a new business, for the first couple of months this person will be doing X and Y, but going forward, this is what they will be doing. In a year's time, if the department go back and say, oh, we heard that you were doing that, you know, this administrative role a year ago, and we've just found out about it, we didn't know, that's not what your immigration permission is.
Yeah.
You can turn and say, well, hang on a second, we said that's what they were doing.
Absolutely, yes.
So again, that's the reason the cover letters are important, the jobs came out and postings are important. They're there so that the authorities know exactly what it is that the expatriate or what the role entails.
Yes.
Because the immigration regulations have got hundreds, if not thousands, of job titles on there. Some of them are very close, but there is no formal definition of each of those.
Right, okay.
And what I might think one job title entails and what the authorities might think it entails
yeah.
is sometimes it is completely different.
Right,
But
yes.
sometimes it's not going to be completely different.
Okay.
But, you know, I guess to use a scenario, a domestic helper, you know, if they're looking after your children, can they take your children to a soft play area?
Right,
Because
do they drive, do they know CPR?
Well,
You know?
driving, I would suggest that you probably would say that, but for instance, domestic helper, the context is it's normally within the domestic household.
Right.
And if they're taking them to a soft play area, are you allowed to do that? I would say legally you probably are, but the best way to protect yourself is by making sure
that
it's, you know, when you set out the roles of this person.
Right,
And of course, domestic helper is probably not the best example because they're not advertised those roles, but certainly when you do the work permit application,
Right, yes.
it would be the roles and responsibilities, you know, looking after the children, taking them to, you know, play areas outside of the home.
Okay, okay. So we're moving on now to not seeking promotion.
Well, that would be the other ones, that sometimes businesses, if you're going to promote an expatriate, you cannot promote an expatriate without the approval of the authorities.
Of the department.
So, and again, there's an employment side context here, is that if you say to your expatriate employee, oh, we're going to promote you, that expatriate employee might think he's promoted at that point.
Instantly,
But
yes,
he's not.
I've heard of situations like that.
It is
Yes.
subject to the approval of the authorities.
Work.
And again, the last thing you want to do is you don't want to tell your employee that you're going to promote them.
Yes.
And then, they go on LinkedIn and say that they're promoted,
That is promoted.
which they haven't been.
Right.
A signature could be changed on an email very easily, which gives a false impression.
Right.
And then work will rightfully start
Right.
going, well, hang on a second, your permission is as X.
Yes.
We've got a signature that says Y, we've got a LinkedIn profile that says Y. You didn't have permission to do that.
So quickly, what does a LinkedIn profile have to do with it? Do they monitor social media
Certainly,
accounts?
the investigative part of work do. It's a fantastic tool for work because it
Okay.
sets out what your job title is.
Okay.
And occasionally, the job titles do not match up with what the work permit
Okay,
is.
so they look into LinkedIn and maybe social media when they're considering applications, you think?
Well, certainly I'd be surprised if they're not.
If they're
And certainly,
not, yes.
it's come up in the past that someone, investigators have said, well, we've checked your LinkedIn profile.
Okay.
And that is a different profile. Your job title is not the same.
Different, yes.
But again, sometimes that's because the employee doesn't put the right job title in.
Okay.
a lot of the time there's innocent explanations. And again, in regards to the promotion and redesignation of expatriates, you know, the business might well be doing it correctly.
Right.
They might be going through the appropriate steps, but they might not have sat down with their employees and said, this is subject to the approval. Okay?
Okay.
We hope to do it, okay, but it could take 10, 12 months. Okay, so in 10, 12 months, you're going to be promoted, fingers crossed, and if, subject to the approval of the department, but you might not be.
Right, yes. So
so-
it's just an informal,
Well, if you're going to promote it, or you're going to try and promote and redesignate an expatriate, you say that it is subject to the approval of the
Oh.
authorities, and you are not promoted until the authorities have given
Right.
its blessing.
okay.
And that, again, the reason for that is so that the authority, so you can advertise that role to ensure that there isn't any Caymanians who can do that role.
Right.
And that, again, is the completely correct thing to do.
Sorry, so job titles and description is one issue, not advertising properly, and misconceptions about promotions before they're actually given the green light by work are some frequent issues that Alastair is saying he sees showing up with employers. I notice, now we're talking, ensuring you apply for the right work permit, different positions have different fees and so forth. Can you
Yeah.
tell us a bit about that?
Again, that's one of the reasons why you want to have the correct job title.
Right.
Okay, the job description, because the work permit board might, or the business staffing plan board,
Right.
they might look at these roles and responsibilities and they might go, actually, no, that's not that.
Yes.
That's not that role, this is this role. And that's a different fee, and they might come back and they might defer the application, just so that you get it right. They're not trying to catch you out.
Right.
Okay, they're trying to make sure that they get it. And certainly to a certain extent, the issue of remuneration comes into some of these parts, because one of the things that we have seen in the past is the Jobs Cayman website talks about salary range.
Right. Which they're actually, sorry, just saying that
Yeah.
they're going to be revamping that portal also.
It's certainly not there's certainly problems with it. And
Yeah.
one of the problems is it talks about salary, but it doesn't then go into any other benefits you will receive. And again,
Okay.
so when you're going through, when you're advertising, Caymanian might look at a advertisement on Jobs Cayman and look at the salary, and the salary is $120,000 per annum or
Right.
something along those lines. But it doesn't mention that there is a discretionary bonus, or it doesn't mention that there is, for instance, some sort of free gym membership or something along those lines, some other benefits that you receive. There are, the form is not particularly user-friendly in some spots, but if you do have extra benefits, discretionary bonuses, performance-related targets,
Right.
you need to put
Put
those
all
in there.
those in there,
Okay,
yes.
because, and if you don't put those in there, you are potentially committing an offence.
An offense, yes, that's what I was about to say. It sounds to me that, from the feedback I've been getting and what I've seen, are that these advertisements and these job descriptions are really, they may not see it as because I think a lot of these businesses, especially the smaller businesses that may not go through, say, companies like yours, they aren't aware of the law. I think work needs to emphasize that everyone that has a business license or taking out work permits needs to be aware of the laws, even if they may not understand it. They try to seek clarification, because they're constantly changing their forms to make them more user-friendly, where they're getting more information. But I am almost sure that immigration is the only department that changes their laws the most frequent in the Cayman Islands, because they're always, looking to.
Well, the forms are changed.
Yes.
And hopefully one of the reasons why they do change the forms
Yeah.
is to make them user-friendly. Ignorance isn't a defence in a lot of the cases in the immigration law, because it's certainly a lot of the offences are what we would describe as strict liability offences.
Okay.
So therefore you don't have to have intent or dishonesty.
Right, so when we say strict liability offense, can you just?
Yeah, strict liability is an offence, is did you do it?
Right.
So
okay.
it doesn't mean did you intend to do it,
Right.
or were you dishonest when you did it?
You did it, yes or no?
Exactly. And then, if it's black and white,
Right.
and therefore you can be guilty of some quite serious offences, even though it's just because of your own ignorance that you made a mistake.
Right.
So that's the reason why it's important to dot your I's and cross your T's. And in particular, you know, I can't stress this enough, that when you're talking about benefits that employees can get, it's so important to advertise the role on the Jobs Cayman website properly and on the application. So again, initially it's important so that the Caymanians out there can look at that role and go, I'm currently paid $120,000 a year. This job is for $120,000, but there is a discretionary bonus. I'm therefore prepared to maybe consider changing my employee, or I will provide them with my CV just to find out a bit more about it. Okay. If you don't do that, then lots of people won't take the risk if it's the same, if they're getting exactly the same pay as the job title is or the advertisement is. It's designed to encourage the Caymanians out so they have sufficient information to know whether or not they want to apply for that job.
Right.
And when you go on the forms, the application forms, the forms say, are there any other benefits this person may receive? And we've heard lots of people go, oh, well, the discretionary bonus, it's discretionary. So therefore, there's no guarantee that they're going to get it. Well, the question then comes is how many times do we pay the discretionary bonus?
Absolutely.
Oh, we pay it every year. Well,
Yeah.
then there's a problem then, is it truly discretionary?
Yes.
But equally, you don't lose anything by putting a one-liner saying the person will have the opportunity to have, apply for or may receive discretionary bonus. You don't lose anything by doing that. And you might gain something, if anything, because you'll get a suitable Caymanian
Right,
who's
I was
doing
just
it.
about to say that, yes.
But equally, you give yourself that protection that when immigration, come knocking on your door and say, well, hang on a second, we didn't know that this person was getting a discretionary bonus. And you never ever said that.
Yeah.
And sometimes these discretionary bonuses can be huge.
Yes,
And-
especially at the end of the year.
Well, and when there have been circumstances where people have applied for permanent residence, and permanent residence distinguishes between income and salary. So that your income is everything.
Right, yes.
Your salary is
yes.
just your basic salary. And a person could have an income which is a lot greater than his salary. And again, rightfully so, immigration have in the past gone, well, hang on a second, these adverts have always said X, and we're now finding out that the true circumstances is that person was earning maybe 1-2 times the amount of money because of this discretionary bonus. You never told us about that.
Right, yes, because I think what most people are, their achievement at the end of the day is to just get a work permit. They're not looking at the formal administrative aspect of it. That's what I've found in my experience of speaking to people or seeing how most, because a lot of people come to me about immigration issues and work permit issues, and that's what I've found. They're just getting they're just applying for a work permit and filling in the information, but they're really not focusing on how will this affect me if it's not done properly, if it's not done right, or in compliance with what work may be looking for or expecting. I just need a work permit and I need a worker.
I agree completely. We all are incredibly busy.
Yes.
The reality is what you don't want to do is you don't want to end up having to come and see the likes of me.
Right.
Nobody ever comes and sees me because they're happy.
Well, they should come and see you in the first place, because then they wouldn't end up in that situation.
HSM have a non-contentious department which I give advice to, but the reality is that if you're having to come and see me, something's gone wrong. And you don't want anything to go wrong.
Right, yes.
Because it's an extra hassle, it's an extra worry. And I don't like telling people, oh, you're in trouble here.
Yes.
I like telling people good news, and occasionally I do tell people good news.
And what happens is that once they have to come back to you to find out that bad news, then that's more work for them to pay you to do. It's just
Exactly.
holding up their process.
If you do it right the first time,
Yes.
and you have an immigration service provider who's competent, trustworthy, knows exactly what they're doing, and you give them all the information, it's one less worry. But if you do it, and sometimes they make mistakes, but if you're doing it yourself, when you're an amateur, it's very difficult to do things because you might not see the pitfalls.
Right, yes.
And you might think that you're doing everything right. And to a certain extent, work will take that into account. They'll go, well, this wasn't intentional, this is a technical breach of the law. We'll give them a pass on this.
Yeah.
But occasionally, they won't.
They won't,
Occasionally
yes.
they'll say,
And-
well, we're gonna fine you for this.
And that's becoming more of what they're doing these days, is that they're not giving people as much a pass as they used to, because, you know, Cayman's population has grown, the work permit climate has grown, the laws keep changing, and work is realizing, that's why they've separated the departments, I feel. And of course, you know, we have our new director of work, Mr. Scott, and, you know, they're realizing that people are taking advantage of the system, you know, and, it's.
You're always gonna get bad eggs who take advantage of the system. That always happens, whether it's the Cayman Islands or the UK.
Right.
You know, in the UK, I had clients who were employing people illegally in the UK, and they're talking about raising the fines for that. I think they're talking about, if you're employing someone illegally now in the UK, and if they do change the law, you could get fined £45,000 for doing it. I've got a funny feeling it was £7,000 when I was looking at this last, but that's a long
Wow.
time ago.
Yes.
But the reality is you can commit these offences in the Cayman Islands by mistake, and that's why it's important to get it done properly. Because if you make the mistake, it's a genuine mistake, work will, in certain cases, go, look, we're just going to give you a warning. We understand that, you know, we understand how the pressures happened here, and I've seen them do that.
Yes.
Okay, they're not monsters. You know, these are good people. They have a heart. They understand how it happens. But if you're a big organisation and you mess up,
Right.
then they have less of tolerance for that.
Absolutely, because they expect better.
They do.
Yeah.
And if I'm not going to say you definitely would get away with, if you're a brand new business and you're setting up and you've made a mistake, okay, you would have an argument that saying that they've learned their lesson, they didn't mean to do it properly, and you run towards the problem. If immigration come and say to you, well, what were you doing? And you hold your hands up and you say, yeah, okay, fully accept I should have done something differently. They're going to obviously take that into account.
Right, yes.
But you don't want to ever be in that situation. You want to get it sorted correctly. You want it done properly, and kind of paying money in the initial part might save you money in the long term. Because again, when you're coming to see me, that's when, you know, we're talking about, you know, extensive fines or potentially criminal prosecutions, and it's not cheap.
So some of the penalties that you have seen, you know, just get back to that a little bit, because many people are complaining about these penalties. I think it, you know, it may have something to do with not realizing the country is changing, the laws are changing, and so policies and procedures have to be changed. It's not going to be 10 years ago where Cayman operated. I used to work at immigration in the early 90s. I was in the Caymanian status and permanent resident section, but you know, that they've divvied up the different sections of immigration now, and it's still not the same. But I realize some residents will still have the mindset of what immigration used to be, of what work permit, you know, the work permit process used to be. And of course, you're saying that's exactly, you know, it's a different. It's a different process.
And not only is it a different process, it's dangerous to ever think that things are going to stay
Right.
still.
Yes.
So things have got more sophisticated as time has passed on. I've seen that since I've been in since 2016. Immigration, certainly since 2016, I think even before this, have had the opportunity to give administrative fines of up to 5 times the work permit fee.
Wow.
So work permit fees, you could get 1,000. You can get, if you promote somebody and you don't get approval, in certain circumstances, you know, you could be looking at a huge fine.
So what you're saying, if they find, give me an example of that. If they find that there has been a breach of a certain area of the law in regards to a work permit application, and there's a fine attached to that, they can fine you that amount, or up to 5 times that amount?
Up to 5 times that amount. So it can be a lot of money, and
Right.
of course they don't have to do it at 5 times that amount. They could take it
Right.
a smaller figure. But you know, there is the opportunity out there for, you know, large fines in these
Right.
cases. And again, they're all fact specific. There isn't, I don't believe that there is a policy, I'm not aware of a policy. The
Right.
department would say that if you have, if you have a HR department, we're definitely gonna fine you 5 times, okay?
Yeah.
Or, if you're a new business, then we'll give you a pass on this
Right,
occasion.
yes.
I don't believe there is anything. The department will look at the facts of the case and they'll take a view. Some of it is quite complicated.
Right, yes.
It's just a question of, you get your, you dot your I's, you cross your T's, you make sure that you've done everything in compliance with the law. And you can ring immigration services practitioners. You can, if you have a relationship with HSM or Denton's or some of the other immigration service providers, you just get on the phone, you ring them and say, look, this is what we're thinking of doing.
Right.
And it's a 5-minute conversation. Most of these people, businesses do it all the time to me. I'm happy to say, look, that's okay, or that's not okay, or I think you should do it this way.
Yes.
For your own safe, own kind of peace of mind. If you're filling in a document that can send you to jail if you've done it incorrectly, which is the ultimate
Right.
issue here, because if you keep on making mistakes, the department will get less and less sympathetic with you,
Yeah.
and they might end up prosecuting you. And if you have a
Absolutely.
particularly egregious breach, where a person has deliberately, employed someone outside the terms of their work permit for a number
Or
of years,
fabricating on their applications.
fabrication would be a classic example.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Then you could end up going to jail.
Yeah.
Okay. The people who make mistakes, genuine mistakes, and I'd be very, very surprised if they ever went to jail, because
Yeah.
it's a mistake. But again, that's the seriousness of the immigration law in the Cayman Islands. If you get it wrong, it can cost you in the pocket. So don't get it wrong.
Yes, I don't think people, and this is just my personal opinion, again, from experience, I don't think, especially the smaller businesses, I don't think that they realize the significance of how serious it is to breach these conditions of immigration. Now, a quick question, do you think some of these breaches or, lack of experience or doing things properly in terms of their applications, do you think that has to do with whether a client could potentially be doing these applications on their own, or whether they're using, what I like to call the small businesses that perform immigration services, or whether it would be more beneficial at times for them to pursue seeking a formal attorney and law firm?
Well, I'm an attorney. I work for a law firm.
Yes.
I'm obviously going to say you should always come to HSM.
Yes.
We're fantastic. We'll save you all the hassle and things along those lines. But I'm a realist, and I recognise that when you're setting up a business, you have a certain pot of money, and sometimes you're going to say to yourself, well, I can't afford HSM's
Yes.
fees, because some people might think they are expensive. We would say that we're not. We're saying that we provide you peace of mind, we provide an excellent service, and we make sure
Right.
that everything's done correctly.
Right.
If you don't know exactly what you're doing, you should always try and get a professional.
Right.
And there are people out there, immigration services professionals, who do a good job. Some don't.
Yes,
Sometimes,
yes.
again, some of the things that you have to deal with is I'm picking up the pieces of things that when they go wrong.
Absolutely, I understand that.
I would suspect that most people aren't malicious. They aren't trying to game the system. Or at least I hope not. At least I don't believe my clients are.
Yes.
I don't think that any of very, very few of my clients, I would say, are trying to game the system, to try and do that. And if they were, then we would give them the appropriate advice, and we would tell them that they can't do that. That's not right. That's not the intent of the system. This is how you do it properly. There are always going to be those people who are out there who are going to do it. But the majority of people who do this, who get into trouble, they make mistakes. They make genuine mistakes. But because the law is, as I say, strict liability, the department sometimes don't have an option. They say, well, we can give you an administrative fine, or we can give you an administrative warning. But
Right.
you've had 2 or 3 administrative warnings. At
Right,
some point in time,
yes.
we're going to have to tell you to do it. You can't
Right.
get another warning, you're going to have to do it properly. If you've got an administrative warning, you should never get another administrative
Right.
warning. You've given that one warning, everything else after that should be perfect, quite frankly.
Yes, I
Just as
agree, because you've gotten a chance to
Yeah.
get it right,
Definitely.
And then you don't want for once you've gotten those administrative warnings, then find yourself back in the same position, and some companies I've found do not learn, but I for the most part, I figure, you know, as I said, a significant amount of people may speak to me, business owners, about work permit issues, and I feel many of them who I've had the experience to speak to have learned if there was any adverse action that may have caused them to come under work scope. But there have been others that were repeated offenders, I would say, and they found themselves being before the courts, you know.
And it's, you know, once you're in front of the courts, it becomes a lot more serious.
Yes.
And you never want, you definitely don't want to be coming to see the likes of me to give you legal advice when something's gone wrong.
Yes.
But you definitely don't want to have to be doing it if it's going to go to court,
Yeah.
because it is so much more serious. I can give you an example of just like a really easy mistake that a person can make, which doesn't provide a defence in law. Someone comes up to you and says, I am a Caymanian. I would like this job. And you go, fantastic, can you just prove that you're Caymanian?
Right.
And the person gives you a voter registration card. Traditionally, only Caymanians can vote.
Can vote, yes,
Okay.
absolutely, yes.
You take that person can vote, therefore that they're Caymanian. You give them the job. Immigration come and tell you, well, didn't you realise this person had their Cayman status revoked? That voter registration card is from 4
It's
years
no
ago.
longer valid,
It's no
yes.
longer valid, because you can lose your right to be
Yes.
Caymanian if
Yes.
depending on how you got it. The defence of due diligence in the law doesn't cover voter registration cards.
Okay.
It covers immigration permissions. So if they provide you the certificate, then you probably would have been okay.
Right, yes.
But because you provided the voter registration card, you don't have a defence. Now, in those circumstances, I suspect that they would give you a warning.
Yes.
But it just shows how easy it is to commit an offence.
So that's a good example and good reasoning for, I'll be quite honest, it has irked me I've had to go through it myself, where I've had to prove that I was Caymanian, and I really did not understand it until now that you're giving me this example. And I've recently had the opportunity to speak to at least 4 persons where they were born here, and they have passports, they were born here, they have Caymanian passports, and they lost their rights to be Caymanian, so they had to formally get acknowledged, and they had voter registration cards, and they couldn't understand
Well,
why they had to get acknowledged when they were born here, raised here, and formally now they're no longer able to, they had to prove they're Caymanians.
there's a classic example which comes out in the law.
Right.
Between 1977 and the 1st of January 1983, Jamaican people who were born in the Cayman Islands were entitled to British Overseas Territory passports.
Oh, okay.
So there are, and these are the group that we would describe as ghosts, because
Right.
they believe they're Caymanian, but they're not. A Cayman Islands passport, as bizarre as it sounds, does not prove that you're Caymanian
Caymanian.
necessarily.
Right.
There's information in the passport that could show that you're Caymanian,
Right,
but it's
exactly.
not definitive.
Right, yes.
Now, there are a lot of individuals out there who have a Cayman Islands passport who believe they are genuinely Caymanian.
That was
And-
my belief too, to be honest with you.
But one of the surprising things that I've found out recently is, I believe under the old Department of Immigration website, there was a guide to who is and who is not Caymanian.
Right.
There is certainly on the government website in regards to the issue of, to get the Lands and Surveys Department, they provide a guide for once they give the stamp duty waiver.
Okay.
But there is nothing at the moment that I'm aware of on the work website that provides a guide to who is and who is not Caymanian.
Okay, okay.
So a Caymanian comes to see you and says, okay, worst case, maybe don't use the voter registration card, because that's not necessarily the best example, because say that doesn't prove that you're Caymanian, although it should do. And the law doesn't provide due diligence defence. So if someone says to you, I am Caymanian, do you have a certificate?
Yes.
Have you been acknowledged? Those letters. What you could then do is that the person sitting next to you, right, we're going to just ring up immigration,
Yes.
okay, and you're going to tell the person in immigration your name, we're going to put you on speaker, and you're going to ask them to confirm that your position is still valid. That gives you the protection, you don't have to worry.
Oh, okay.
You should
okay.
always also take a note of the person you spoke to as well.
Right. Yes, I always try to advise people to do that. Take note of who you've spoken to, the date and time.
Yeah.
When you're speaking to anyone at all about any business transactions and so you wanted to touch on some other issues in regards to blacklist.
We could just briefly covered that earlier.
Yes,
That's say
okay.
that's because the immigration will treat you more severely if you keep on making the same
Right.
mistakes. I think the intention
Oh, that's
is,
what you're referring to
Yeah.
as a blacklist.
yeah, I think the suggestion is that they are
like-
going to have a different grading, so that when if you've made mistakes in the past,
Okay,
okay, they are going to scrutinise your applications more severely in the future.
okay.
So again, people make mistakes; they understand that.
Right. So
Try to
they-
avoid it in the going forward.
they'll give more attention to your application the next time around, more than likely.
I suspect that
you
they
know.
probably are doing that just as a matter of course in any
Yes.
event, because I say these boards are, the boards know what they're doing in the vast majority of cases, and they would, this person's made mistakes in the past, well, let's just make sure they've dotted the i's and crossed the t's in this case.
Okay. And, Hilary, you've been fairly quiet.
I never
Wondering when-
interrupt Alastair when he's on a roll of work
Yes,
permits.
wondering when it's your turn, so we're gonna hear some interesting things of your area of expertise. These are other, I tell you, this will probably be a show where listeners are gonna want to have a repeat episode also, because this is all of the topics that listeners would really like to hear now, so, you are going to talk to us about.
Well, I'm going to talk about, it ties in with when you're applying to the work permit, and that is you have to apply for health insurance. It's a hole that we often have in Cayman. I'm always coming across people saying, I don't have health insurance. And I'm going, well, that's actually legal.
Yes, it's
Well,
mandatory that
It's
goes along.
mandatory that you have health insurance, and if you are employed, it is your employer's responsibility to make sure you have health insurance. I mean, even if you're unemployed, it's your own responsibility to make sure you have health insurance. And I know that is such an easy thing to say and a very hard thing to do, because health insurance, as we know, is not cheap.
Yes, we all know that, but I think everyone that applies for a business license and a work permit knows that by now. Common knowledge that health insurance is mandatory under the laws of the Cayman Islands.
I would love to agree with you that say that yes, they do, but I'm routinely shocked that they seem not to.
Oh, I you know, maybe because they may not be able to afford it or may not want to pay it, because like you both agree, you know, it's costly for health insurance, but, you know, give us some frequent issues that you've seen could arise with.
So one of the most frequent I've seen from an employer's perspective is that they've hired somebody, whether on a work permit or a Caymanian or somebody with permanent residency, and they've gone, okay, so I have to give you health insurance, that's fine, you have to pay, you're liable to pay 50%, that's all fine, everybody agrees on that, and they go, you have children, so do they have health insurance? Oh yes, they're covered under my spouse's employer.
Right.
And then I see the employers go, okay, but that's not true.
Right, yes.
Or the spouse actually doesn't have a job anymore.
Okay.
Stuff like that. So while in the perfect world, the employer only has to make sure that there's health insurance in place, either by providing the policy and the employee pays 100% for the dependent. If the employer is caught in a situation where either the employee has lied to them or the circumstances have changed and their dependents don't have health insurance, the employer is liable under the law for fines, but also if the dependent has gotten ill in any way, they could be liable for all the medical costs entitled to it. So you could suddenly be, for not asking the right question and asking for proof that health insurance is in place for the dependents, if they're not going to be covered under their own company policy,
Okay.
they can find themselves with a rather large bill.
Yeah, so if an employer has an employee that has dependents, it is still required that those dependents are covered with health insurance.
Yeah, and you know, if husband and wife team different employers, they can pick which employer covers it, but both of those employers in that situation need proof
Yes.
from the other employer that it's in place.
Yeah, so employers, you must ensure, if you're not putting insurance in place, you have to ensure that that employee or potential employee shows you proof that they have insurance in place. And it is your responsibility also to ensure that the dependents, which are gonna fall under your employee, are also covered in that insurance that they're supplying proof of. Okay, so I think that's pretty clear for anyone that's listening. Moving on.
The other big issue that when I deal with health insurance in my professional capacity is what happens to the employee when the employment relationship has ended.
Right.
For whatever reason, termination for cause, the employee wants to take a work break or you know, go back.
Quit.
Yeah, for whatever reason.
Yes.
The law states that the health insurance terminates on the first day of the following month. So if I quit my job on
Right.
like the 6th of the month,
Right.
my health insurance goes until the 1st of the next month, well, or the 30th, 31st.
Right, so if you quit on the 3rd of August, your health insurance goes until
The 31st of August.
31st
So,
of
and,
August.
and what we see a lot of people is they try and cut it off at a halfway point.
Right.
And you're not technically allowed to do that.
Right.
The other issue that we see a lot is construction in the law that says if your employee doesn't find work, you are liable to make sure that they have health insurance for the following 3 months.
Okay.
It's at the employee's cost. Not the
Right,
employer's
yes, I
cost,
am
but they,
aware of
yeah,
that,
they stay
yes.
on the policy, and it's like, the employees often don't want to stay on the policy.
Yes.
So you need to find a way around this, that either they, you know, say, yes, I've got other insurance, or they come in a way to pay for the further 3 months.
Right, okay.
That is something, because we see a lot of people who just go, okay, bye.
Now, are employers liable if the employee decides, I don't wanna be covered under your insurance for that 3 months? And potentially, because I've seen where some employees would have not been working at that job anymore, but then they're not starting their new job until whenever their new work permit comes through, which could be another, over 3 months with, you know, unless it's a temporary that's being expressed. And during that 3 months, if the employee says, I no longer want to have your health insurance, I can't afford to pay it, is the employer liable for that?
So there is a,
'Cause I've seen
there's an interpretation issue in the law. If you read the law word for word,
Right.
it says you shall, which again makes it a strict liability.
Right.
You do or you don't.
Right,
However, the Health Insurance Commission has actually taken the view that the employee is allowed to opt out of it.
right, okay,
And there has been case law that has sided with Health Insurance Commission that
Okay.
says it is at the employee's request.
okay.
It was never fully challenged though, so I don't know if the court will always
Okay.
say. So I wanna say is that my gut instinct says that yes, the employer is liable,
Okay.
but at the moment, that's not what's been done in
Right,
practice.
okay, well, you don't want to frighten the
Yeah.
employers by thinking that that could potentially be the case. Although, in all fairness to the employees, it should be where they should be frightened, because you don't want to have an employee where they do not have health coverage simply because you didn't do your part as employer, even if the employee isn't with you any longer.
Yeah,
You know?
but again, it's one of those areas, if you are like a big business,
Right.
that's a cost that, yeah, you probably don't wanna eat,
Don't
but
want
it's
to
not
lose.
actually gonna hurt the books. But if you're the little mom and pop shop around the corner that's struggling to pay your overheads, 3 months health insurance out of your own pocket
Right.
it's suddenly a very big expense.
I think it's going to get to a point where, you know, that's why it's such a hardship to get these work permits and get business license in a manner of speaking, because employers have to prove that they're able to afford these services, and this is, besides you know, besides not having your applications done properly, I know that the work department is very, very serious about prosecuting people employers that do not offer health insurance and in compliance with their employees having health insurance or pension, or pension. So, but moving on, I always have something coming up in my head. Hilary, go.
Yeah, I mean, when we're talking about penalties for not having health insurance, it's a $30,000 fine.
Oh, I did not realize it was that much.
So,
Listeners, $30,000 on a summary conviction.
yeah, and there's actually a sliding scale. If that's kind of for a first offense. If you have more, they keep adding on.
Oh.
But yeah, so I mean, like a health insurance commission can actually fine you an additional $10,000 if they think there's been a breach.
Oh my goodness.
And so, as I said, and then if the breach continues, it's a further fine of $500 a day.
And there's no discretion. I want you to repeat those penalty amounts for me, please, because it sounds like there's no distinction between a large company or a small company, or mom and pop, as you know, I call them small businesses.
Yeah, so these are not administrative fines, which is what Alastair was talking about.
Okay.
These are the fines that are stated in the legislation, and it says failure to provide health insurance is a $30,000 fine.
And do you think if the cases reach to the courts, there could be heftier fines potentially?
And potentially, I mean, if you.
I'm trying to scare employers here so they can make sure that they're in compliance.
There's nothing in the law that says that 30,000 is just for the business. That could be per employee that doesn't have health insurance.
Wow. Wow. And some of the other penalties you've seen, you could share with us.
Well, I mean, there's a $10,000 fine if you don't let the inspector actually do their jobs and access the books. I mean, the Health Insurance Commission means business when trying to make sure that everybody on this island has health insurance.
And also because, you know, when there's no health insurance in place and something happens to these employees, it could potentially fall back on the responsibility of government.
Yeah, that's exactly who ends up paying for it.
Medical services for employees.
As I always say, the Health Insurance Commission, you know, they have an uphill struggle, but one of their main functions is to find somebody else to pay so the government doesn't have to do it.
Right. And are these the only areas of penalties you've seen employers be subjected to?
Well, there is a clause under the health insurance law that actually would make the employer liable to the actual medical costs of an uninsured employee as well.
Okay.
Which can be very wide ranging, obviously, depending on what those costs are.
Oh, this is serious. I did not know that there was so much going into these penalties because of immigration laws constantly changing. And we're going now to pension. That's another big breach with employers. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with what I have seen. I've seen at least 4 cases in the last 6 months of what I call workers' compensation situations with employees where that has become a separate issue than under the umbrella of where employees get injured on the job.
Yeah, that's generally separated out from the health insurance
that's what
aspect.
I found too. Yes.
And there is a workers' compensation act which sets out what would be paid if there wasn't an workers' comp insurance policy in place. If you've got the policy in place, then you have schedules in your policies about what would be paid out, and they're very similar. But
okay, that's very important to know, because with the growth in Cayman and you know, people becoming more aware of their legal rights, people are becoming more aware that if I get injured on the job, you know, my employer is not wanting to be accountable for this or take liability or pay me any additional for what isn't covered under health insurance and so forth. So that is something of importance to know. And getting back to pension, you have to see with me, I always deviate.
No.
Again, try to get everything in for listeners and let them know that you guys are very knowledgeable about these topics. So pension.
So, I mean, I think we can all, you know, knock on wood, the pension holiday is over.
Yes.
We're not looking for a repeat of that from the pandemic perspective. It came back into force in October of last year. They did adjust the cap for October, November, and December because they realized it, you know, not everybody was back to full salaries if they were like in the hospitality industry.
Right, yes.
So what was quoted when they signed up for the plan probably wasn't the right figure.
Right.
But we are now back to the full cap. You know, the cap is $87,000, and under the National Pensions Act, because of course civil servants have their own legislation and different rules.
So what does the cap mean specifically for our listeners to understand?
So, I mean, the cap is put in place, and it only does affect a certain area of the population. You have to pay 10% of your annual salary into a pension fund, and the cap is 87,000. So if you're already earning more than CI 87,000, anything above that is non-pensionable. So that doesn't catch the majority of the population, obviously.
Sorry about that. Okay, so we're talking about offenses for failure to pay pension. Now, again, we know this is very common with employers, the same as it's common for breach of not having health insurance. Tell us a little bit about that.
So, I mean, the law is quite, I want to say it's quite clear, but if you actually try to read it, it's not that clear just because it's like halfway through an amendment, so you actually have to look
Right.
at several different
Okay.
documents. But the intention of the law is clear, that if you're the employer, you are required to pay into a pension plan on behalf of your staff, and the staff, your employee is required to pay their portion as well. So it's not, you're not responsible for all of the 10%. You're responsible for half.
Okay.
And this is designed to be something that we should be able to not probably live fully on, but use towards our expenses once we've stopped working.
Right, okay. Well, I don't know about that in Cayman right now, but let's continue.
But
cost of
that's
living
the principle, but
yes.
with the cost of living and then sort of the earnings of the pensions themselves and stuff
Okay.
like that, yeah, I think you might want to start saving in other ways if
Yes.
possible.
That sounds to me exactly what should be happening. And so these penalties, just tell us some of these fees,
So the
different tiers of offenses.
yeah, so this one is very truly a tiered offense. If you do not pay into a pension plan, it is $20,000 or 2 years imprisonment or both.
Okay.
As far as I'm aware, nobody's gone to prison for failure to pay a pension. And you just don't want to be the first person.
Right, right. I'm sure that the government would prefer to have that revenue, but as Alastair said earlier, you know, if you keep repeating the same offense or the same breach, you know, I would say it would catch up with you, so hopefully that it doesn't get to that stage with anyone.
So that, as I said, it's 20,000 is your first offense. Your second offense is 50,000 or 3 years in prison or both, and then your third offense is 100,000 or 5 years in prison or both. And when we're talking about offenses, we're not saying you didn't pay for this year and you didn't pay for that year. This could be, first offense could be employee A, second offense could be employee B.
So at the same time?
It could be. I mean, they do try and work with you. They're not looking to put the, you know,
Everyone in
out
prison.
of business or
Yes.
like that. They're trying to make it whole. And one thing that takes a lot of people by surprise, if you have failed to pay the pension, one of the things you're also going to be ordered to do is to make your employee whole.
Right, okay.
You're gonna the pension that they should have
To
received has
catch up with the pension that you've owed.
Yeah, and one of the ways they do that is that you have to pay the principal, but you're also required to pay interest on that. But the
Oh.
interest penalty is fixed at prime plus 5%.
Okay.
So depending on what prime is, I mean, I had to calculate.
Right now would not be a good time for prime,
Yeah.
I think.
But I have calculated this a couple of years ago, and we worked out the interest was 9.75%.
Wow. That would not be good for any employer at all.
Yeah.
That, guys, you do not want to not pay pension. This is very ugly if you get yourself caught in this situation.
But it's also, you gotta look at it, if you are deducting pension from somebody's paycheck.
You should be able to pay.
and you're not paying it in, that is wage theft.
Yes.
As well. So
That's theft.
And so there is other liabilities that you could be
Liabilities for
facing
that.
as well.
Yes, yes. I know people are aware of that. I mean, it's right there in black and white. If you don't do what you're supposed to do to comply with the law, then you're committing an offense, you're breaching the law, and there's a penalty. You know, whether it's pension, health, work permit. You guys, you wanna do a business and you take out a business license, you must know that before you got to this point that there are fees that are going to be paid. Now, I saw, going back to Alastair and giving him an opportunity to, you know, any final words he may have to say or any final points he wanted to add in terms of work permit fees. Now, I know work is requesting work permit fees in advance these days. It's no longer, and if the work permit is not granted, then those fees are refunded. I know I've heard a lot of complaints about the timing and the period that it takes to get those refunds, but we're just gonna give Alastair a few minutes to touch on anything, any last words that he wants to say and add to the work permit issues, concerns for our employee, our listeners.
I suppose the ironic thing that I would suggest is that the work permit, what Hilary's been talking about,
Right.
in my experience, in the few cases I've had to deal with, actually affects Caymanians more than it does
Yes,
for work
I
permit
agree.
holders.
I agree.
Because when you're applying for a work permit, there is oversight on, do you have a pension?
Yes.
Do you have health insurance? And you have to provide evidence to that effect.
Right, yeah.
And quite frankly, if we're talking about those employers who are the bad eggs and they're going to lie on that, then they deserve everything that's coming to them. But the majority of people will get their employee pension, they will get them health insurance.
Right.
Those Caymanians out there are being taken advantage of by unscrupulous employers in
Right.
certain cases who are saying, oh, you're not an employee of ours, you're self-employed.
Yes, yes.
Which is nonsense. It's just, but then they go, well, if you're self-employed, we don't have to pay you health insurance,
Yeah.
and you're responsible for your pension. That's, again, to a certain extent, it is ironic that.
Once they have the work permit for that employee, it's their responsibility, isn't it?
Well, yes, it's their responsibility, but the work permit regime ensures that employers cover the expatriate.
Yes.
The Caymanians out there who
That's
might
right.
not be sophisticated, who might, you know, if they are working in an establishment and they're told, oh, you're not a genuine employee, we'll pay you, but you're self-employed, or this is how you're going to be paid.
Right.
They might think, oh, well, that's right, and they might not have health insurance because
Right.
they might not because what the
Realize.
boss is saying is that, oh, you're self-employed.
Yeah.
It's your responsibility to get it, whereas they're not truly self-employed.
Yes.
They are employed.
Yes,
And-
employees in this
and
cut and dry.
It's cut and
just
dry,
employee.
and you know, all I would say is that the DLP do a good job of investigating those.
Yeah.
And if you're a Caymanian and you think that you're being told that you're self-employed and you're not self-employed, you should go and just go to the DLP and say, look, what do you think about this?
Right, yes.
Because the DLP will say, well, actually, you're either right or
Yeah.
no, we don't think you're right.
An employee is an employee, point blank, that's.
Well, yes and no. There are grey areas, but sometimes it is quite clear that an employee is an employee, and the unscrupulous are putting a term or a label on it which doesn't bear any resemblance to the facts.
And in those cases, the DLP will look behind it and they'll go, no, the facts are this.
Yes, yeah.
That is an employment relationship. You are therefore responsible for pension. You're responsible for health insurance. You haven't provided them.
Okay, okay. Well, that's good news to know if our listeners had those thoughts in mind. You know, one of the reasons why I did this show, because I wanted to inform listeners, but as people are becoming more aware of the show, I've had people, potential employees from overseas, reach out to me on social media wanting to get information, and you know, I always try to direct them to the work application website, because I am not an attorney and I do not want to give legal advice other than what would be in the law, applicable to the law, and pro se, I like to call it pro se information. But that information is very good to know, because there are, you know, I wanted Caymanians, especially small business owners especially, but everyone that has a work permit here on Ireland, and plus everyone that has a business license, which take out work permits, to get this information. Because again, as I said earlier, too often I've heard where people are just trying to function as a business and take out a business license, and they're not looking at the fine print or the logistics of you know, taking out work permits and what the implications of that entails, and then they find themselves in a situation. And Hilary, if you have any final closing remarks, and then I'd like you, if you wanted to again repeat your company, where you're representing, and also where our listeners could find you, the contact information and the address, in case anyone wants to get in touch with either of you at the firm to, you know, maybe get, I don't know what your consultation fees are, whether or not there's a consideration for consultation of small business owners, and possibly, you know, a different fee structure for tiers of businesses, I don't know, but listeners that would want to consult with your company would find that information out once they've contacted you guys.
No, I don't think I've got anything closing to say on the health insurance pension bit. It's a liability for the employer. They need to be aware that they have to have these in place for their employees. Yeah.
I hope they know that. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if I also do, if somebody's going, oh, I don't think I can, you know, afford an attorney, I do actually talk about employment law basics.
Right.
And health insurance and pension. I give classes or facilitate seminars through the Chamber of Commerce,
Okay.
as well as the Cayman Islands Human Resources Professional Society as
Okay.
well. So if you're like, well, I can't afford an attorney, I can be reached on those platforms. I have employment law basics. We won't be talking about health insurance and pension coming up on the 14th of September this month. That will be more employment contracts
Okay.
and statutory payments in that regard.
Okay, that sounds good, that sounds good. And can you just, again, reiterate, you're from HSM, could you let listeners know where you're located and, the address, and then maybe give your contact? I don't know how it's done at your firm, whether you can give listeners your direct number and or your direct email, or they can go through a general, number at the office and a general email address.
Sure. So HSM Chambers is located at 68 Fort Street, which is next to the library in town. The little Centennial Park, the library, the little park. And
On the
then
right-hand side of the library. It used to be Butterfield House.
That's exactly where.
Okay.
And if somebody wanted to contact me about health insurance and pensions, probably the best way is by email, and that's hbrooks@hsmoffice.com.
Could you spell that out for me, please, quickly? Sorry.
Sure. It's HBROOKS@HSMOFFICE.com. There's spelling test in there.
Some people, you know, with their accents, I've found, even with me, people were like, I got the letter wrong, or I got the dot wrong, or something to that effect. So, and are you guys on social media?
Yes, we are.
The firms?
The firm is on social media. The marketing manager will confirm this, probably the worst person to try and contact through social media.
Okay,
though.
but they can pass on the message?
Yeah.
Okay. And Alastair, you want to close off and give us your contact information if the listeners want to contact you, work on it related or anything
Yes,
else?
so best by email, that's David, so that's A, then DAVID at hsmoffice.com, so HSM, then OFFICE.com. And our switchboard is 949-4766.
Okay. Well, listeners, we have had Alastair Davis and Hilary Brooks in the studio with us this evening talking about work permits and health insurance and pension, the pros and cons of those areas of the immigration law, and what you have to do to keep your company in compliance and what you have to do to get yourself out of non-compliance. And we hope that this has been an informative show for you. If you have legal issues or legal topics that you'd like to see addressed on the show, please reach out to me at 922-5086, legaltalkwithpatricia@outlook.com. Thank you so much, Alastair. Thank you so much, Hilary, for tuning in. And it was great having you in the studio. I appreciate you agreeing to come on. And listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Legal Talk with Patricia Bryan. Have a good evening. He's gonna tape all that out. I'm so sorry. So we did need that hour and a half, didn't we? Okay, I'm so sorry. Thank you very much, guys. I have
Thank you.
bad anxiety. The rain threw me off, and it was just taking a minute to get my head in gear here. I was in an accident some years ago in the States in the rain, and every time it rains and I'm driving, it kind of puts me in a nervous state. So forgive me, Alastair.
That's good.
I think I didn't keep up with you as much as I should have. Don't worry about this. He will take all of that out. I don't know how to turn it off. What? Can you press the red button?
Sure.
Sorry.